Today we are continuing on with the Mount to Coast C1 versus R1 review. I have put a ton of miles in the R1, so we're closing in on 100, I think. And the C1 is a new release that's coming out here in a couple of days, so we are actually early to the party on it. And we're going to break down why you might want one over the other. The C1 is going to be more of their super trainer, whereas the R1 is going to be more their daily trainer. C1 is a touch heavier, so it's 9.2 ounces for a sample size, whereas we're all the way down at 8.5 for the R1. Now, you do get less stack height with the R1 because of that, so you're down at 35 millimeters of stack versus 47. And interestingly, I feel like brands try and make this a little more cohesive throughout. You are at a 6 millimeter drop here versus an 8 in the R1. Now, they do both have supercritical foams in them. So the circle cell here on the top of the C1 is going to be their supercritical foam, and you get a big old slab of that with just a carrier foam beneath, which is going to be a rubberized EVA. And that'll be compared to the light cell, which is also a supercritical process for the R1. The R1 is a full body of this light cell foam, and it has done really well for what I intend this shoe to be. It is my firmest shoe, so it's the shoe that I grab for when I want a lot of ground feel, even when I'm doing like strides. If I know I have strides as a part of my workout, I really like grabbing for this shoe because it's light and it puts a lot of the force into the ground. It doesn't feel like I'm getting a ton of smush out of the shoe, almost kind of like how a track spike doesn't have a ton of compression. It just feels like all the force you're putting into the ground stays there. And we're going to be seeing how the C1 does against that, where one might win over the other, and just a general comparison between the two. As always, I am a very value-heavy guy, so we're looking at $180 for the C1, whereas we're at $160 for the R1. Is it worth $20 of your hard-earned money to go to the C1 as opposed to the R1? I will be figuring this out kind of in real time with you. If you want to see the very first thoughts on the C1, I've put 0 miles on this so far. I do a first run review where I do 10-minute pace, 8:30 pace, and then something under 7-minute pace, depending on what the shoe gives me. And we will see how this shoe does when we put them up head to head. For this review, I'm going to do 2 miles in the C1, 2 miles in the R1, and then close it out with one more C1 back to the R1. So we'll get 6 miles in total, 3 in each. And I'm going to break down kind of just my general thoughts between the two, who these might be served for better, and maybe where they fit in a rotation for you. As I said, this is all one continuous workout for me. I'm going to go back and forth between these two shoes a couple times. So I think that'll give me some longer time to kind of think about my thoughts and kind of coalesce them all together before I give you an idea of how I think these two shoes compare and which one you should get for your own rotation. So we can see here, pretty similar on the upper. We're using the same kind of upper and lacing. So same thing where we have the quick laces down here and then your normal tie laces up top. The difference in stack height is obviously pretty evident here. You get quite a bit more in the C1. But other than that, it looks pretty similar. Aesthetic-wise, I do think Mount to Coast does a really good job. I like it. Toe box-wise, I think they both do a really good job here. So we're going to go ahead and put the R1 on. Actually, we'll do the R1 and the C1, one on each foot. And I'll give you my thoughts on that as we feel them. Actually, I can tell you just from having that on my foot a second ago, this is a more fitted feel for sure through the midfoot, even through the upper a little bit. We're gonna get this guy back on too, actually. I wanna see head to head how they feel. One thing I did mention with the C1 is I didn't feel the need to runner's loop it. This is actually one of the best feeling uppers here in terms of the lockdown feel. It feels like you're just right in where you need to be, at least for my foot. Lock-in feel, this is 10 out of 10. Really, really love that lock-in feel. On foot, I can definitely feel like I've got more extra space here. Size-wise, very true to size. I usually wear a size 12 in most things. Size 12 in both of these feels super spot on. Really dialed that in, especially for my foot. It just really nicely done uppers. I've never had a problem with the Mount to Coast uppers. I like them. Big thumbs up. Now on foot, I can, feel that I'm quite a bit higher on the C1 here than I am on the R1. A pretty noticeable difference in plushness. I said the C1 wasn't like super plushy early on, but man, compared to the C1, it feels like we're getting a ton of cushion out of this. So I guess all there is left to do is throw the other R1 on and then get to some running. So I've been moving the past couple of days and my body is like super sore. Switching from the C1 into these, man, I wish I was back into the C1. Honestly, like, I like the R1, but it's like for that right purpose where I want to go strengthen my foot and I feel good and I'm doing an easy run and kind of all those things. So an interesting note with where I'm running right now is having more of these rocks underfoot. I don't know if I gave enough credit to the C1 on kind of blocking that out. Wasn't really feeling a lot of rocks under feet where I am with these, which again, not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, what are you asking the tool to do? Not something I'd usually be asking this shoe to do. However, I do think it demonstrates the point of I was clearly getting more protection out of the C1 than I initially thought. So again, finding good spots in the C1 for sure. So as always, I try and give thoughts as I have them. I was running for, I don't know, almost a full mile there. And this one just feels faster, the R1. It might just be the weight, a decent little bit lighter. It feels like it's way more down to go fast. And that was one thing I was going to talk about is this is my favorite shoe to do strides in that isn't like clearly meant to do them. This is like a ultra shoe where people are running hundreds of miles in them. Well, I like it because you can put so much force into the ground. I really like it for strides. I think it does that task really well. So far, in terms of what I think I might want to do a workout in between the C1 and the R1, I think the C1 is getting an advantage there. Looks like that was an 8:33 mile. Talking to you guys jacked my heart rate up. So I was in the 160s, went up to 170 and was dropping down into that one, but feeling good here. Feels nice. Honestly, with this road being the composition it is, some areas it's loose, other areas it's actually pretty well packed. Like this stretch here is really nicely packed, and the ground compressing a little bit feels like it actually helps the shoe a bunch, and feeling good for easier running. Just another thing we're noticing, this feels like such a stable platform. I've always really appreciated the R1 for that. You just cruise along, and the more stable a shoe feels, I think the more often you're willing to grab for it, or more situations maybe. I just really appreciate when I don't feel like I'm having to stabilize or feel like I'm rolling in or out. And again, I don't normally feel like I'm being pushed any sort of way with my normal mechanics, but this feels like a particularly smooth roll, and I love that. As I've said with a lot of these, that 830 range is where I get a lot of my volume. That's where it feels good. So that was an 825. And as always with the R1 It feels like I'm doing all the work. I say that a lot at the running store. It feels like my foot's doing the work in a lot of really good ways where I feel like I get a lot of the benefits from it. But on the other side of that same coin, it feels like my foot's doing all the work. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's good to have a shoe that makes your foot do a lot of the work. But that does mean I almost always want another shoe to go with this shoe. So in a rotation, this is not my like one shoe rotation where this is the only shoe I would have. This R1 almost always to me would belong in a rotation with something else. I'm running low on daylight though, so we're gonna hop into the C1, get 2 more miles. And while we're doing that, we're going to have a lemon Huma. It does have 25 milligrams of caffeine, but I won't tell anybody if you don't, even though it's 7 o'clock. We are back in the C1s here, and we are gonna go ahead and get into the next miles. So 2 miles into the C1, and okay, in the initial video, I said I wasn't feeling a bunch of pop. Coming out of the R1 into the C1, this does feel substantially more energetic. Now, different ways, right? So this feels like the foam is giving me more pop. The R1 feels light and responsive in that just all the force I put into the ground with the R1 goes into the ground. This one feels like maybe I'm getting a little bit of compression and response from the foam. Those two things have different places, but they are both feeling very good. I'm liking it. We just ripped the top of this lemonade Huma, and we're gonna give it a go. So, I don't have Huma a ton normally. It's not my favorite texture. This is one of the better flavors. And the texture is pretty light, pretty viscous. Think maybe a little thicker than like applesauce. Huma's not usually my first choice, but will in fact work in a pinch. And it's what we had in the car, so we'll take it. Well, I missed that mile, but it was like a 9:08. Feels quite a lot like I'm bonking right now. So we moved houses this weekend and just finished up today. And I just don't think I had enough to eat. So even though I've been on top of the gels, can't really make up for being in a big deficit. As for the C1, still feeling good. Not like a real big update on this. So something I'm feeling now as I'm fatiguing a little more and putting less energy into the ground is the rocker on the C1. Feels very nice. I never really feel a ton of rocker in the R1, but as I'm just kind of leaning my body forward a little bit, trying to run as easily as I can, this has a nice roll to it where I'm getting into the forefoot and then just getting off pretty easy. Doesn't feel like I have to aggressively toe off quite as hard. Another thought from a protection standpoint, feeling like kind of cruddy in the latter part of this run like I do, I'm glad I'm in the C1 right now and not the R1. This just feels like a much more protective shoe all the way around, and I think that'll be one of the biggest determinants for you at home on which shoe to get is, do you want something that gives you more ground feel, or do you want something that feels like it's a little more protective, feels more like a shoe? So like I said, this one feels like the newer shoes where you get good foam, where it compresses, kind of bounces with some energy. That's kind of your choice. Do you want more road feel, ground feel, or do you want like more new aged poppy shoe feel? Another pro tip is have extra goos in the car. I usually try and keep 3 or 4 in there just because I know you're sometimes going to need them. And I'm glad I've got them in this particular scenario. The sour peach goo is one of my favorites. And while I would love to just go home like I normally would in a scenario like this, I do want to finish out the workout. So we're going back to the R1 and hoping that the Huma 20 minutes ago and the other gel right now are going to be enough to let us get these last 2 miles in and at least see what the differences are as I'm fatigued. I don't know. Could be a good thing. Again, immediately feels like I'm lower to the ground. Just different shoes for different purposes. We'll go ahead and get these tied up. And then again, we're losing light pretty quick. So hopefully we can get this done before the light goes all the way down and I can still get a recording of my final thoughts between the two. Plus, when you think about it, like I've only got 1 mile and then 1 more mile, it's like you only have 1 mile, even though you have 2. I don't know. Play mind tricks on yourself. Just be smart and be safe. Like, I do know that I'm fine to do this. I know, especially having put another gel in, I'm not going to be in a really scary situation at all. Nothing's going to happen between here and a half mile out before I come back to switch shoes again, where I won't be able to get back. So do be really careful always, anytime you're out, especially by yourself. Put yourself in good positions, and if you're going to do something stupid, like continuing to run when you feel like you're bonking, do it smart, like by having an extra goo in the car on hand. Just my 2 cents. I do not intend for these to be fast, so for what that's worth. An 8:42 there. Again, I really like how the R1 feels. It's just different. I probably sound like a broken record by this point, but I like the way the R1 feels. It's just not a lot of substance underfoot. After putting that extra goo in, feeling a little better. So we will go ahead and do the last mile on the C1. We are going from the R1 back to the C1. Just like that, we're gonna go ahead and get this last mile in. As I said, last mile here, we're gonna take it nice and easy, hopefully match something similar pace-wise. And then we will give the final breakdown and any last thoughts I think we need to line up, talking about value and talk about who might like which shoe better than the other. But first, we must run a mile. I realized we forgot to do a stride, so they're gonna do a stride here real quick, see how the C1 feels when we bang on it a little bit and give it some real pace here. Okay, that was 427 for about 80 meters. About 80 meters. Felt better with a longer stride length. So increased stride length usually means increased force going into the ground, means it compresses the foam more. When I did lengthen that stride out a little more, the foam felt like it gave me more bounce back. So that again leans to this being a pretty dang firm foam. Not a bad thing. Again, there are some shoes where, like a 1080, if I put extra force into it, it just feels like it mushes down and doesn't do anything at all with that force. It just kind of disperses. This being durable or strong enough where when I compress it, it wants to pop back, makes me feel good about longevity, and then also makes me think that it's going to break in. So like the R1 did break in nicely, where it softened up over time. I think the same thing can happen here. And if it does, I think it'll be a really, really good result. I'm excited to get more miles in here so I can tell for real if that ends up being the case or not. All right, so let's wrap up the C1 versus R1 conversation. I think we need to start by saying these are two very different shoes that, although look similar to one another, are very different and serve very different purposes. So the R1, as I see it, is almost like a flat. It is your foot doing all the work. You get to put force into the ground and it responds really well. So this foam feels very strong, very durable, very rigid. So you put force in, you get it back from the ground. The C1 feels like a much more new aged, if you will, type shoe where you get all the benefit of having a really good foam that's compressive, hit the ground, compress, and then really rebound well. You also get more of the rocker geometry that I noticed in the C1 compared to the R1. I've done countless strides in the R1 and have always really enjoyed doing strides in them. It felt good in the C1. It felt like what I would expect it to, given what I just said, where the foam is very responsive if you put force into it and compress it enough. I think there are plenty of people out there that would not get a ton of compression out of the shoe, and that's fine. It would maybe just need to break in for them. That's something that'll have to be tested more. I'm excited to do more of that testing and see how it feels. I think for the R1, it took probably 50 miles for it to break in. And that's a lot for a shoe nowadays, in my opinion. By and large, I think shoes have a pretty good step-in feel, and you can get a sense of what it's going to feel like for a while. There are, of course, outliers, but I think by and large, that is the case. Where's the value between the two? 160 and 180. I think they're both great. I think you can find flats that are less expensive. Will they last as long as the R1? I don't know. That is like my biggest selling point at the running store is this. The R1 is just kind of hard to kill. You can run it and run it and run it and run it. And I think that's really cool. I really like that. Value on the C1. I think it does a good job. I think for 180, it is like really nicely priced. I think under that, it would be a steal. I think above that, it would be a little high for my taste. You know, being a manager at a running store, I see a lot of different shoes out there. And I get a pretty decent sense of where things fit in terms of like the macro picture of the different companies and brands and stuff. And I think that's a pretty unique perspective. I think appropriately priced here. Now, if it lasts as long as an R1 does, I think that is just another value prop that this guy gets that could be really beneficial for those out there who seek value like I do. Who is the R1 for and not for? Who is it for? Somebody that wants ground feel, that wants a good foot strengthening shoe for their rotation, but has a rotation built out. It is definitely not a solo shoe, in my opinion. I would want it to be paired with something, usually a more cushioned shoe. A super trainer could be good. So you've got something that can do a lot of your in-between stuff where you're not running really easy. And even if you did want to run easy in it, I think that'd be fine. But not going really, really fast. And then the R1 could be when you're trying to do something different, get your foot in a different position without really putting too much strain on it. And then I think it can also do the fast stuff well. That was one thing I noticed going back and forth between the two of them. The R1 felt much more willing to go up tempo. So if I was choosing one or the other to go fast in, it would definitely be the R1 for me. If reviews like this are helpful for you, please go take a look at the channel, see if there are any other videos that interest you. You can always take a look at Ontos Running. It is my own running apparel brand, mainly focused on hats, of which I make completely custom, and I have stuff on the way. My first batch of hats, actually, in fact. I also have shirts and quarter zips and socks, all really cool stuff. If you want to support the channel that way, that'd always be appreciated. If you want to take a look at the next video, take a look right here, or take a look at the channel right here. Hope you guys have a great day. Bye.